In the year 1930, my wife and I said farewell to my father, who had just undergone a serious major operation, and we sailed for America. Had I realized how ill he was, we would have postponed our journey, but we were assured that all was going well. On our arrival in New York, however, we learned that my father had died a few days after we had left for England. Naturally, our first reaction was intense grief, but later we felt somewhat relieved to know that my father was no longer suffering and that he was free of all earthly troubles. Also within ourselves we had the feeling that he must be living on under much better conditions, as we were convinced that death did not end everything. It is most difficult to describe this feeling that was deep down inside us, without having any tangible reason to account for it. 4 years later, my wife's father died, and in the same year my mother followed him, when again both my wife and I realized that we felt the same about their passing as we did when my father went over. We also had the same inner feeling that we had not lost them for good, and that when our time came, we should all be together again. In my sleep state, a few days after my mother died, I saw her standing on what appeared to be a moving staircase which was almost 100 feet wide. She was one of a very large number of people, men, women, and children, all ascending slowly. Around the base the light was very grey, which became lighter and lighter as the staircase moved upwards, whilst the people at the top were bathed in a most beautiful golden light. Waiting for these people who were slowly ascending was a very large number of souls, amongst whom I saw my father, who was looking remarkably well. When my mother reached him, he took her in his arms, both looking radiantly happy. I saw many similar reunions, and the joy radiated at these meetings gave me such happiness. On awakening, I thought that it must have been a dream, but as it seemed to confirm what I had always thought would happen when we died, I wonder if after all it could have been more than a dream, and that I had actually been permitted to see this most wonderful sight. Later, I had confirmation that I had in fact seen the reunion of my dear parents while I was astral travelling in my sleep state, and what is very rare, was helped to remember every detail on awakening. Later in this book, I shall describe more fully some of my further astral travels in the sleep state, and the confirmation I received from the other side that these experiences actually took place. About 2 years later, my sister on a visit asked us if we knew anything about life after death, and we replied that we knew nothing about the subject. She then told us that she had been present at a psychic meeting held in Manchester. The meeting hall, which was not large, nevertheless held about 250 people. My sister and her friend managed to find vacant seats at the back of the hall and waited to see what would happen. The people present appeared to be drawn from all sections of the community, including businessmen, working men, and a large number of women. On their faces was a look of anticipation, and in the hall there was an atmosphere of hushed excitement. There was a raised dais at the bottom end of the hall on which 3 women were seated. After about 5 minutes, one of the women announced the opening of the meeting, read a few social notices and announcements of future meetings, and called on one of the other women to address the people. This woman spoke very well and talked about life in the spirit world, and explained that when we die, it is only our physical body that disintegrates, and the soul, which is freed by death, lives on. She then introduced the medium, who was the 3rd woman on the platform. The medium took the platform and explained that she had the gift of seeing and hearing the spirit people on the other side, and that there were many of them waiting. Where possible, she would pick up messages from the spirit people and pass these messages on to the audience. My sister added that, to her surprise, the medium gave several messages and described some of the spirit people to different sitters in turn, and with only one exception these descriptions were recognized and acknowledged. In several cases the medium even gave the names of the spirit people, and most of these names proved to be correct. Then, to my sister's amazement, the medium pointed to her at the back of the hall and said, "Your mother is standing close to you." She then went on to describe her as she was whilst on earth, and my sister had to agree that she had described her perfectly, her height, build, colouring, and a most accurate description of her features and mannerisms. The medium continued, "I have a message for you from your mother. She asked me to tell you that you will be moving to a city, the name of which starts with the letter B. As this climate does not suit you, but at the moment you have not the slightest idea of moving, you will be pleased with the move, and your health will greatly improve there." As everyone, including the medium, were complete strangers to her, my sister was naturally very impressed, particularly as not even her friend had met her mother, so she felt there was not the slightest possibility of collusion. A short time later, my sister had the opportunity of moving to Birmingham, and eventually moved to that city, when after a time her health did improve considerably. She went on to relate that she was so impressed with the accurate description given to her of her mother that she decided to attend a similar meeting in another part of the city a week later, where a different medium was announced. Again, this medium addressed my sister and gave her the same full description of her mother, stating that she was standing near her. She discussed members of our family and went on to give her a message which my sister said could have only come from someone who knew her as intimately as her mother did. Both my wife and I were very impressed with what we had just heard, but somehow were not at all surprised, in view of what we had always felt must be taking place. After some discussion, we both decided that the time had arrived for us to thoroughly investigate the claims of others, where they considered they had received undeniable proof of survival after death. We hoped to prove to ourselves to our satisfaction that this was a fact or otherwise.